Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to neutrally decode a pretty fascinating text from 2006. The source of our content today is the founder of Lifechanyuan, Feng. We're looking specifically at a piece he authored under the pen name Hun Dun Cao, titled A Good Prescription for Governing the World. Now, whether you're already familiar with Lifechanyuan or this is all completely new to you, this text is incredibly interesting. It offers this distinct, heavily structured lens for analyzing human progress, and honestly, for understanding why societies fail. We're going to break down exactly how this philosophy works and look at the unique criteria it uses to judge both history and the modern world.
All right, here is our roadmap for today. We'll kick things off with a core theory, the so-called good prescription. Then we'll dive into the text's reflections on Chinese historical movements. After that, we'll zoom out for a global and contemporary analysis. And finally, we'll cover what the text outlines as the ultimate path to civilization.
So let's jump right into part one, the core theory, or the good prescription.
Okay, we have to start with this quote from a figure in the text named Tian Lai Coat. This isn't just a casual observation, right? The author presents this specific sentence as the absolute navigation compass meant to guide humanity out of a historical maze. He basically argues that this one thought is the concentrated crystallization of the greatest thinkers in human history. To really get what this text is about, we have to internalize this exact hierarchy of values.
So what does that actually mean in practice? Well, it boils down to grasping these three foundational pillars. The author strictly, and I mean strictly, prioritizes civilization over just shaping a democracy. He puts internal spiritual construction way ahead of outward material building. And, this is the real picker, he insists that a spiritual return to the true self is vastly more important than just innovating our political institutions. Basically, in this framework, changing the system doesn't mean a thing if you haven't fundamentally changed the soul. To back this up, the text argues that humanity has been wandering blindly, searching for this exact formula for thousands of years. Just think about this timeline for a second. We're talking from the ancient era with Socrates and Lao Tzu, through the religious era with figures like Jesus and Muhammad, all the way up to modern titans like Marx, Washington, and Martin Luther King Jr. The author makes the bold claim that every single one of these leaders searched exhaustively for the true path, but ultimately, they all failed to find the actual exit to the maze. Moving right along to Section 2, Reflections on Chinese Movements. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. The author uses this strict evaluative matrix to systematically score major historical movements. It's literally an uncompromising grading rubric applied to decades of history. The argument is that each of these events failed to save the nation because they lacked the proper balance of those three pillars we just talked about. If a movement was super focused on institutions but had zero spiritual return, instant failing grade. It's his way of proving why everything before Lifechanyuan fell short.
Let's look at a couple of specific examples to really illustrate this critique. Take the Cultural Revolution. The author actually acknowledges it was a massive attempt at shaping democracy and spiritual construction. But he argues it was deeply flawed by class division, a lack of humanism, and most importantly, zero spiritual return. On the flip side, he looks at the 1989 movement and later democracy advocates and critiques them for being totally blinded by institutional change. The text claims they went all in on democracy, but completely ignored civilization shaping and spiritual return. So in his view, they were just lost in the maze.
The text then shifts its analytical lens over to Falun Gong, and when evaluated strictly through the principles of Lifechanyuan, it falls completely short. The author bluntly asserts that Falun Gong lacks civilization shaping, lacks democracy shaping, and totally lacks systematic spiritual construction and that crucial spiritual return to the source. Because of all this, the text concludes it is entirely incapable of guiding the nation forward. But the author doesn't just look at the past. He stress tests the contemporary policies of the early 2000s too. Think about then-President Hu Jintao's Harmonious Society initiatives. Surprisingly, the text actually praises these policies for finally touching on civilization shaping and spiritual construction. But, and you can probably guess where this is going, there's a fatal flaw. Because these state policies still lack that deepest component, the spiritual return to the true self, the conclusion is that the nation is still stuck looking for the exit. All right, part 3, global and contemporary analysis. Let's zoom out and apply those exact same three pillars to the global stage, specifically looking at U.S. foreign policy in places like Iraq and Iran. The author argues that U.S. interventions are fundamentally doomed because they hyper-focus on pushing democracy and changing institutions. Because the U.S. completely ignores civilization shaping and spiritual return, the text literally calls these massive geopolitical efforts a counterproductive farce.
It's a pretty striking application of his framework. Try to change a country's institutions without addressing its spiritual core, and you are guaranteed to fail.
Which brings us to our fourth and final section, the ultimate path to civilization.
So, after dismantling all these global and historical attempts, what does the author say is the actual solution? Well, the text confidently declares that humanity is finally blessed. It claims that the birth of this specific wisdom, the teachings of Master Tianlikao within Lifechanyuan, is the ultimate long-sought answer. After millennia of wandering in the dark, the author states that humanity finally has a clear, unambiguous direction. The exit to the maze has supposedly been found.
And he doesn't just leave it at that. This isn't meant to be some passive armchair philosophy. It's a massive call to action. The author passionately calls on government leaders, religious groups, political parties, and academic bodies worldwide to basically stop what they're doing and study this newly discovered compass. The insistence here is that only by uniting under this very specific wisdom can humanity actually escape the maze. As we wrap up this explainer today, I want to leave you pondering the core tension of this entire framework. We've seen how Xie Feng, Lifechanyuan's founder, applies a pretty relentless standard to human history. But based on everything we just decoded together, what do you think? Does a spiritual return to the true self really have to happen before democracy? Can we build a functioning, civilized society just through institutional innovation? Or is the text right that without spiritual construction, we're all just wandering lost in a maze? It is absolutely a fascinating lens to view our world through. Thanks so much for joining me, and keep questioning the frameworks that shape our history.